Have you ever imagined someone building 130 houses on your own land? They thought I was just some clueless heir, fresh off a plane from London, ready to take the money and walk away. They thought the rules were theirs to write, the land was theirs to steal, and that justice was just another thing you could buy. But there's one thing they didn't know. I'm Jack Morgan, a forensic asset investigator who's dismantled transnational money laundering empires. What they didn't realize was that every single brick they laid was part of the trap I'd been waiting for spring. My name is Jack Morgan. I'm 46, a former federal asset fraud investigator, now an independent financial consultant. I've tracked down laundered money for corporate giants and exposed ruthless CEOs in polished boardrooms, but no one has ever stolen from me like this. 6 months after wrapping a long-term advisory contract in London, I landed in Arizona with a simple plan. Return to the land my aunt, Elizabeth Morgan, left me. 50 acres of raw desert. The same wild place I ran through as a kid. She told me, "Keep this land, Jack. One day, you'll need it." I tossed my bags in the back seat of an Uber. The driver, a young Mexican guy, kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror. "You sure this is the right address?" he asked, slowing down as we turned onto a brand-new cobblestone road. "This used to be desert," I said. "Not anymore," he replied. "Look." I turned my head, and my heart clenched like it had been punched. A luxury housing development now towered over the land I once knew. Beige two-story houses stretched in rows with identical soulless precision. Lawns trimmed like movie sets. Identical mailboxes embossed with the Sterling Hills HOA logo. A large sign stood at the entrance. Sterling Hills, Phase 2, 70% sold. I stood frozen, like I'd taken a punch to the gut. My land, gone. No, not gone. Seized. I said nothing to the driver, paid the fare, and walked straight into what looked like a sales office. Once a rocky hill where my aunt had planted a wild apple tree. The glass doors opened. A blonde woman in a tight pencil skirt and stiletto heels strutted across the marble floor like she was walking through Versailles. "Welcome to Sterling Hills," she chirped. "Are you interested in a Phase 3 home? We're nearly sold out." I pulled a worn piece of paper from my backpack, a deed to the land in my name. "I'm interested in why you built an entire neighborhood on my property," I replied. She froze for half a second, then smiled again, suspiciously. "Oh, you're Mr. Morgan, right? Ms. Ross mentioned you might come by. A little confused about the development agreement." Ms. Ross. I'd never heard the name, but my investigator's instincts flared. Something here stinks. She led me through a hallway lined with renderings. Fake homes, golf courses, clubhouses, hung like trophies on the walls. Proof of crime being legitimized. I passed through the neighborhood under the wary eyes of people living on my land, walking dogs, sipping Starbucks, stepping out of garages like this was paradise. But to me, it was a crime scene. Ms. Ross's office was on the second floor of the main building, glass everywhere, gleaming like a multinational headquarters. I walked in. The woman who stood up had silvered hair combed like a news anchor, a designer suit, and eyes sharp as razors. Stanford Law diploma on the wall, a civic award plaque. She smiled. "Jack Morgan, you finally made it. I'm Deborah Ross, president of the Sterling Hills HOA. Please, have a seat." She slid a thick folder toward me. "We've sent multiple notices to your listed address regarding this development. With no response, we proceeded according to HOA protocol, signed by your aunt in 1999. I flipped through the documents. Notices, certified mail receipts, public records, all sent to one address, 1325 Redwood Lane. I stopped cold. That was my aunt's old house. It was demolished 2 years ago. No one's lived there since. Deborah leaned back. Her smile held, but her eyes didn't. That's the official address on record with the HOA. It's the owner's responsibility to update. We followed the procedure. If you're dissatisfied, we're open to negotiating compensation. I stood up, quietly, eyes locked on her face, watching the slight twitch in her lip when she said, compensation. A tell. I'd seen it 100 times. She knew. She knew the address was dead. And she kept sending mail there anyway, to create a legal cover for stealing land. I nodded. I'll review the documents with my attorney. Deborah shrugged, like this wasn't her first rodeo, be my guest. But I'll warn you, going up against Sterling Hills HOA isn't easy. We're represented by Morris & Keller. Maybe you've heard of them? I had. That's the law firm that crushed 3 environmental groups last year in the pipeline case. Corporate assassins in tailored suits. But I'm not one to fold. I walked out of her office into the blinding Arizona sun, glaring down on those manufactured rooftops. I stopped at the spot where my aunt's favorite cottonwood tree once stood. Now, a cheap plastic fountain. They buried my past. But they didn't know. I'm Jack Morgan. And I live to expose things like this. That night in a hotel room, I opened my laptop, put on my glasses, and dove into land records and development filings. My fingers moved across the keyboard like old weapons. I was back on the battlefield. I'm Jack Morgan, and I didn't sleep that night. Not out of shock, not out of anger, but adrenaline. When you've spent hours tracing financial trails across continents, you learn one thing. The clever ones slip up right when they think they've won. I opened my laptop and accessed the Arizona State Real Estate Database. In less than 2 hours, I found the first thing that made my blood boil. Sterling Hills wasn't just built on my land. It was part of a chain of 15 suspicious residential developments built over the last 5 years. Each parcel of land had once belonged to elderly owners, most of whom had passed away with no clear heirs, or in some cases, like mine, heirs who lived out of state. I stared at the screen, a chill crawling down my spine. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a campaign, a model, a conspiracy. And I had just become their biggest problem. At exactly 2:48 a.m., my phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. Heard you're back. Want the truth about Sterling Hills? Meet me at Java Junction at 10 a.m. A friend. A friend? In cases like this, friend usually means one of 2 things. Someone who's about to kill you, or someone who's ready to help you kill a rotten system. I texted back, I'll be there. 10 Cork a.m. Java Junction, outskirts of Iron Ridge, a small coffee shop, lots of wood, smelling of burnt waffles and dark roast. The kind of place where everyone looks up when a stranger walks in. I picked a corner table by the window, ordered a black coffee, no sugar. Watched every person who walked through the door. At exactly 10 Wei, she walked in. Navy blazer, hair in a tight bun. A thin face with tired eyes hidden under careful makeup. A black document case in her hand, slightly trembling. I recognized the kind of tremble. Not fear, but the kind of strain you feel when you're resisting both your conscience and danger. She sat across from me. You're Jack Morgan? Depends on who you are. I'm Rachel Vaughn. I used to be a legal assistant to Deborah Ross. And I think I can help you. She opened the case. What she showed me nearly stopped my breath. Internal emails, financial records, copies of forged land certificates, doctored zoning maps, and a chain of offshore accounts siphoning money out of the HOA. Sterling Hills, she whispered, isn't a normal HOA. It's a front for a systematic land acquisition racket. Deborah targets elderly landowners, isolated or absentee, sends notices to outdated addresses, then claims no response, invoking silent consent to seize the property. And the HOA? I asked. The legal weapon, Rachel said, pushing forward a copy of the HOA bylaws. They've rewritten it multiple times, vague enough to hold up in court. She has her own legal team edit it for every scenario. Why are you helping me? She looked me straight in the eyes and said something I didn't expect. Because I'm the reason. You inherited that land. Your Aunt Elizabeth Morgan. She was my mentor at Stanford Law. She knew Deborah was targeting her property. So she changed her will. She didn't choose you because of blood. She chose you because she believed you could take Deborah down. I clutched the documents, my hand trembling. She knew? Rachel nodded and placed an envelope on the table. She left this for you. Only open if you see Deborah Ross on your land. I opened the letter. The handwriting was unmistakable, neat, precise, the ink still bold. Jack, if you're reading this, then Deborah has started her game. That land isn't just property. It's evidence. Under the big oak tree by the creek, I buried everything you'll need to turn the tables. Trust Rachel. She's a good one. Don't let them get away with it. Aunt Elizabeth. I folded the letter and gave a bitter smile. They thought I was some vague heir, a clueless guy fresh off the plane, a problem solvable with a check. They were wrong. That night, Rachel and I brought flashlights, a shovel, and a waterproof bag. Beneath the oak, the quietest place. My aunt used to sit. We dug up a metal box. Inside were audio recordings of Deborah's secret meetings, copies of HOA contracts from 1999 that were never publicly filed, a thick journal from my aunt, documenting every shady move over the last 5 years, and a mineral map of the property, marked in red, an untapped natural gas deposit. I looked at Rachel. She nodded. Now you see why Deborah won't stop. I stared at the files, fury rising inside me. They weren't just stealing land, they were stealing the future. And I never back down, not when the truth is on my side. That afternoon, I sat in the hotel room, paperwork stacked like a mini fortress. My laptop had 7 tabs open at once. My fingers glided across the keyboard like I was playing piano. But what I was creating wasn't music. It was a legal war, part classic litigation, part high-tech warfare. I built a timeline. 6 months after my aunt passed, Sterling Hills broke ground. All notices were sent to a demolished house. The HOA legalized everything through procedures, written by themselves. I reviewed the mineral map again. The natural gas reserves were enough to sell extraction rights for $50 million. Every brick they laid was just an excuse to squat long enough to mine the gold beneath my feet. I needed 2 things, a traitor from inside their system, a trap so subtle they'd walk right into it without realizing. And I had both, Rachel, and I devised a plan. She'd return to the HOA, playing the repentant insider who wanted to help cover up the Jack Morgan situation. Meanwhile, I would act like the spineless heir, eager to take a couple $100,000 and disappear. They'd think I was weak. The biggest mistake in any playbook. Neighborhood meeting, Sterling Hills Community Center. The room was packed. Residents shoulder to shoulder, eyes filled with suspicion, looking at me like I was the man coming to steal their homes. Deborah took the stage like she'd just been re-elected president. "We sympathize with the confusion Mr. Morgan is experiencing," she said, her voice smooth as snake oil. "But the law is on our side. This project is completely legal." I stood up. "I'm not here to ruin anything. I just want fairness." "That land is mine, and now there are hundreds of people living on it." I paused, eyes downcast, played it just right. The room went silent. A few heads began to nod. Deborah smiled, like she had just dropped the final nail in my coffin. "We are willing to offer a generous settlement, $200,000. I raised an eyebrow, smirked. $200,000 for 50 acres? That's a low ball if I've ever seen one. A man stood up, golf attire, Rolex glinting under the fluorescent lights. Jim Harper, Deborah's construction partner. "Look, pal, take the money or spend 10 years fighting it out in court. Your call." I didn't answer, just pulled out my phone. Before I decide, I think everyone should hear this. I hit play. Deborah's voice boomed across the room. I knew the old lady was dead. That's why I sent the notices to the old address. Jack Morgan was in London. By the time he figures it out, it'll all be wrapped up. The room exploded, shouting. Someone slammed their hand on a table. Deborah's face was drained of color. Jim tried to back toward the door, but a resident blocked him. I stepped forward, holding up a folder. And this, the real environmental report. Pollution levels are 3 times the legal limit for residential land. You're all living on contaminated soil because this HOA bribed the inspector to look the other way. Deborah shrieked, "Lies! I'll sue you for defamation." I smiled, cold. "Good. I'll see you in court." The room wasn't against me anymore. They were against her. She stood frozen, pale as wax under stage lights. They thought I came to negotiate. No, I came to clean the house. After the community meeting, Deborah Ross vanished from the radar for 3 days. During those 3 days, I was as busy as if preparing for a national-level manhunt. And in truth, that was exactly what was happening. Rachel called me at midnight. Her voice urgent. Deb's packing up documents, moving money out of the HOA accounts, and she just called someone. She called him Senator. Bingo. I wasn't just fighting an HOA. I was exposing a system with roots reaching all the way to Capitol Hill. I sent the entire file, audio recordings, environmental reports, financial documents, internal emails, to someone I knew from my Washington days, FBI agent David Chen. Just 6 hours later, I got a reply. "We've been tracking Jim Harper in a federal money laundering case. But we never had a link to Deborah Ross. Now we do. Meet tonight, 8 p.m., Regional FBI Office. p.m., FBI Office, Tucson." A plain white room with a board plastered in photos, charts, and red string connecting Jim to Deborah, and to one name that made my breath catch. Senator William Claiborne. "We've been following Claiborne for 2 years, Agent Chen said. He provides political cover for Deborah in exchange for dirty money from these land grabs." "What do you need from me?" I asked. Chen looked at me, eyes like cold steel. "Be bait, meet Deborah, pretend to accept her offer, wear a wire, expose the entire ring." I nodded. I'd worn a bulletproof vest investigating cartels, a corrupt HOA wasn't going to shake me. The plan, Rachel would stay undercover. I would pretend to cave, demand $8 million in cash to stay silent. The FBI would strike when Deborah revealed her true hand. The next night, Rachel messaged me. She took the bait. "The money's ready. Location, warehouse off Route 47, 10 p.m. tomorrow." 10 p.m. Abandoned warehouse outside town. I arrived early, checked every exit, every blind corner, every shadow. FBI lay in wait 200 meters away. I wore a covert mic used in federal witness ops. Right on time, headlights flared. A black SUV screeched to a stop at the front. Deborah stepped out flanked by 2 bodyguards built like light poles. In her hand, a duffel bag bulging with cash. $8 million, she said curtly, tossing the bag at my feet. "Count it." I opened it. The smell of fresh bills hit me, all crisp hundreds, just as expected. "Now sign this," she said, pulling out an NDA. "You disappear, I never see you again. It's over," I shrugged. "And if I don't sign, what then? I get handled. Like journalist Thomas Brennan?" Deborah's face went pale. "I don't know what you're talking about." I pulled out my phone, a photo of an email between her and someone named Victor, reading, "Brennan's about to blow the story. Handle that problem ASAP." Just as one of the guards reached for his gun, the warehouse door exploded. The FBI stormed in like thunder, flashlights cutting through the dark, screams, handcuffs clinking. Deborah was slammed to the ground, wrists zip-tied, shrieking, "Jack Morgan, you'll pay for this!" I stepped forward, nodded. "No, Deborah, you're the one who's going to pay, and not just in dollars." By the next morning, headlines lit up across Arizona. HOA president arrested in multi-million-dollar real estate scam. 3 city council members resigned. Senator Claiborne's office was locked down by the FBI. And I, Jack Morgan, from nuisance heir, became the trigger for the largest HOA investigation in U.S. history. Deborah Ross was arrested. Jim Harper vanished with $5 million. The residents of Sterling Hills were in chaos. People flooded the community center like a hive torn open, terrified that they had bought homes on stolen land with legal paperwork that could crumble at any moment. I stood in front of the crowd. No rallying cry, no judgment. Just said 3 things. You are victims, not accomplices. I don't want to take anyone's home. I want justice. If you cooperate, I will make sure your ownership is legalized and no one will end. Up on the street, suspicion turned into cooperation. Residents started submitting evidence, forged documents, threatening emails, shady maintenance fees, environmental inspection reports, dated before the houses were even built. Federal District Court, Phoenix, Arizona preliminary hearing for Deborah Ross. The press swarmed like flies. Journalists dubbed it the Enron of residential real estate. I was called as the key witness, and I prepared like it was the biggest case of my life. Deborah's defense attorney was Richard Clay, nicknamed the White Shark, infamous for defending real estate giants that lost $1 billion and still winning on appeal. He walked, in wearing a $3,000 suit, grinning like I was the appetizer. "Mr. Morgan," he began smoothly, "isn't it true you have a personal grudge against my client?" "I have a grudge against fraud, sir." "Mr. Morgan, you claim to be a financial expert. Then why pretend to accept a bribe? Why wear a wire? Why deceive my client?" I looked him straight in the eye. "Because your client is a nationally operating con artist. And since I'm not an FBI agent, I'm allowed to fight dirty." He froze, starting to feel the shift in the balance of power. Then came the moment I had waited for. I asked the court's permission to present. "Your Honor, I'd like to cite Whitmore v. Henderson, 1896. The courtroom went silent. Clay shot up from his seat. "Objection! That's outdated case law." Judge Carter, silver hair, voice like ice, nodded calmly. "My J.D., the thesis was on that case. Proceed, Mr. Morgan." I laid it out. According to Whitmore v. Henderson, any construction on another person's land, even with good intentions, is legally owned by the rightful landowner. In this case, the 130 homes of Sterling Hills legally belong to me. The room erupted. Even the prosecution's jaw dropped. I continued, "I'm not asking to take anyone's home. I propose selling each property back to its current resident at the price they originally paid, stripping out all fraudulent fees, using the proceeds to detox the contaminated land and issue legitimate ownership." The judge nodded, her eyes showing rare respect, a solution both humane and lawful. "Any objections from the government?" "No, Your Honor," the prosecutor said. "We fully support it," Clay stammered. "This is outrageous. This is a political trial. This court lacks jurisdiction." Deborah screamed behind him. "You don't get it. They promised to protect me. Call the senator. I'm not going down alone." The judge slammed her gavel. "Mrs. Ross, remain silent or I will have you gagged." But what she had just said unleashed a storm. That very day, the FBI raided Senator Claiborne's office. The final puzzle pieces fell into place. The HOA was a front. Behind it, a land speculation syndicate connected to politicians, lawyers, and resource extraction firms. They thought they were running the country. Now they're standing trial. Since the day Deborah Ross was arrested, the entire state of Arizona has lived in a storm. News of Jack Morgan, the man who exposed HOA land theft and forced the federal government to act, flooded TV, radio, podcasts, even billboard signs along the highways. Senator William Claiborne, once hailed on stage for championing civil rights protection, is now the central figure in a federal investigation for collusion, bribery, and laundering money for a shell HOA syndicate. The federal government could no longer turn a blind eye. The FBI expanded its probe into 12 other states, where the build homes on stolen land and legitimize it through HOA's model had quietly taken root like poisonous fungus. I was invited to serve as a special advisor to the Senate Investigative Committee. And I didn't come empty-handed. I brought with me a map of the multi-state phantom HOA network reports on laundered funds through shell accounts, a list of 200-plus implicated officials, and most importantly, a video confession from Jim Harper, caught. At the Mexico border with a fake passport Senate hearing, live national broadcast, I stood before 12 senators, cameras zoomed in, harsh white lights beating down on my forehead. Mr. Morgan, do you have evidence that the HOA system has been weaponized for land fraud? It's not just a system, Senator. It's a shadow industry worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The entire room held its breath. I clicked to the first slide, the Sterling Hills model, from desert lot to super profit in 12 months. Then the next, 15 parallel cases in Nevada, New Mexico, Utah, Texas. Finally, I pointed to a photo of a forged signature on an HOA agreement from a 92-year-old man. This man signed the document 4 days after he passed away. As the hearing concluded, I walked out of the Capitol to the sound of applause. A reporter asked, "Do you think this will lead to real reform?" I answered simply, "I don't just want to change the law. I want to rewrite how Americans defend their land." Meanwhile, Deborah, now denied bail, sat in a federal holding cell. She broke, not from the looming 25-year sentence, but because those who once protected her were vanishing one by one. Rachel, now acting as legal counsel for the residents of Sterling Hills, received word that Deborah had agreed to cooperate fully. In exchange, leniency and a full disclosure of the network behind her. She spoke to the federal investigators on record. "I didn't start this operation. I inherited it. But I know who they are, and I'll name everyone." At the same time, the FBI and I combed through every house sale in Sterling Hills. The results made me scowl. Nearly 80 homes were sold within 72 hours, signed off by a notary whose license has expired 3 years earlier. All the documents were null and void, which meant nearly 80 people were living in homes that, legally, had never been sold. I stood before the community, not as the accuser this time, but as the one offering a path forward. "I could sue every one of you to reclaim this land," I said plainly. "I have the legal right, but I won't. Instead, I propose legalizing all your property deeds, erasing every fraudulent fee, and creating a community reconstruction fund sourced from recovered HOA assets and court-ordered compensation." The room erupted. People who once saw me as a threat now stood and applauded. One elderly woman came up and held my hand. "Son, you're the reason we still have a home to sleep in." The next day, I received a draft of a new bill, the Jordan Amendment, a federal act requiring that any seizure, development, or transfer of property rights by an HOA must include multi-point notification, email plus, postal plus, direct contact, independent, property verification, and recorded approval from the rightful landowner. I read through it and nodded. Good, but it's missing one clause. What's that? If organized fraud is uncovered, all structures built on stolen land automatically revert to the rightful owner, no negotiations. When Deborah Ross bowed her head and pled guilty in federal court, she didn't just expose the entire land grab operation. She also brought with her a long list of names once considered untouchable. Federal judges, 6 state senators, local officials, and 2 executives from international real estate development firms, those who once shaped the law, were now waiting to be sentenced in the same courthouse hallway as her. Jim Harper was caught in San Diego after nearly 3 weeks on the run. He tried escaping on a fishing boat, but the FBI had already planted a man on board. When they cuffed him, he muttered, "It's just land. Those people weren't using it anyway." I listened to the recording and just smiled quietly, because he still didn't understand. Land isn't just land. It's roots, it's memory, it's truth. And he had trampled it with the cheap shoes of greed. At the final hearing, I was the third witness. The defense attorney, none other than Richard Clay, made one last desperate attempt to frame this as my personal vendetta for profit. I let him talk. Then I stepped up and presented the final slide. Over the past 5 years, this shadow HOA network has stolen over $2.3 billion in property assets from rightful landowners across the United States. I hit the clicker. A heat map appeared. Every red dot was a successful land theft. The courtroom fell completely silent. I looked at Clay and said, "What I built wasn't a story. I rebuilt the truth." The judge delivered her ruling. Based on the evidence, testimonies, and current legal framework, the court hereby declares that the 130 homes in Sterling Hills shall be transferred to Mr. Jack Morgan, the rightful landowner. However, per Mr. Morgan's proposal and with unanimous community agreement, the court approves a special resolution. Each home will be resold to its occupant at original purchase price. Any fraudulent markup will be deducted from confiscated HOA assets. The Sterling Community Fund shall be established to manage environmental and legal affairs for the next 50 years. I officially became the man who sold each home back to the rightful occupant at a fair price. I refused any personal profit. Every dollar went toward land decontamination, scholarships for residents' children, a national legal fund to protect landowners from HOA abuse. Rachel Vaughn, the lawyer once suppressed by Deborah, was now executive director of a nonprofit dedicated to fighting abusive HOAs. She opened branches in 3 states. Her client list ran through the end of the year. "You made this possible," she said. I smiled. It wasn't me. It was my aunt. And you. 3 months later, I received a package from the federal government. Inside was a signed bundle of legislation titled the Jordan Amendment, a federal law to protect property from HOA seizure. The act requires all HOAs in the United States to use multi-tier notifications, mail, email, and phone confirmation, ensure all legal transactions include an independent witness, ban all forms of default approval without in-person landowner consent. And then something small happened. But it moved me more than any verdict. Connell, my childhood friend, now a resident of Sterling Hills, was elected the new HOA president. His first act, he renamed it from Sterling Hills HOA to Sterling Commons, a civic association with no forced dues, no absolute authority, and full transparency, serving residents, not ruling over them. He stood before the entire neighborhood and said, "We've lived in the shadows long enough. It's time to become a real community." I watched as people gathered on my aunt's old land. The place Deborah once turned into a fake fountain was now a community garden. Children planted flowers, adults built squash trellises, and in the very center stood a small wooden sign, in honor of Elizabeth Morgan, who planted the first seeds of justice. 1 year after Deborah Ross was sentenced, I returned to the place, the spot where Aunt Elizabeth had once buried the evidence beneath the old oak tree. It was now the heart of a blooming community garden, where children played and grown-ups planted vegetables, swapping old stories under the sun. Deborah is now serving 25 years without parole in a federal prison in Colorado. The last time she appeared in public was during her guilty plea. I let greed guide me. I didn't just break the law. I shattered what every community needs most: trust. Too little, too late. But still, a necessary ending. Because sometimes villains don't lose when they're caught. They lose when they're defeated by who they've become. Jim Harper was sentenced to 15 years in exchange for full cooperation. The $30 million he stashed away was recovered almost in full and is now flowing into the Sterling Community Trust, used for land remediation, environmental testing, and giving real support to the victims of the scheme. Rachel Vaughn became the leading voice of the anti-HOA abuse movement. She opened offices in 6 states, spoke before Congress, and published a best-selling book titled "No One Gets to Steal Your Land," a battle cry against any HOA that crosses the line of ethics. Connell Lewis, my childhood friend, now serves as president of Sterling Commons, no longer an HOA, but a voluntary civic association. No forced dues, no $250 fines for leaving your trash bins out. Every decision is now made through transparent community voting. He told me over coffee, for the first time in years we can host a barbecue without worrying about being fined. And the kids? They ride their bikes up and down the sidewalks, no security goons chasing them. As for me, I declined every investment offer, every chance to turn fame into fortune. I kept just the center parcel, the land where my aunt's garden still grows. And I donated all rights to the natural gas under it to a community trust, with one condition: the profits must only be used to fund scholarships, maintain clean, livable environments, provide legal protection to families threatened by rogue HOAs. Across America, 3 months later, Congress passed the Jordan Act, a sweeping federal law requiring every HOA in the U.S. to provide at least 3 forms of notice, mail, email, and in-person dialogue, before any action affecting property, require community vote for any fines over $500, with public tallies automatically forfeit any structure built on stolen land, and return the land to its rightful owner. And then, one morning when I stepped out onto the porch, I saw something no dollar could ever buy. Kids laughing in the sunlight, adults chatting freely, no longer glancing at hidden cameras, neighbors calling each other by name, not by complaint number, the old HOA scrubbed from the records, replaced with a single word: community. I sat down on the wooden bench where Aunt Elizabeth once read her books. In my hands was the final letter I found in the box she buried. Jack, if you're reading this, it means you've done something I never dared to dream. You've rewritten the rules they rigged against us. Remember, land is the last thing we have when everything else is taken, and if anyone tries to steal it from you, show them. You're not the last person they should fear. You're the first they should avoid. Aunt Lizzie. I smiled. A soft breeze stirred. In the golden dusk, the wildflowers began to bloom again. No more plastic roses, no more concrete, just life rising from justice. Here is the precise and faithful English translation of your powerful closing statement, crafted to preserve both tone and meaning. Sterling Hills was once a symbol of gold-plated deception, an HOA drunk on power, lawyers twisting the law, and residents bled dry month after month. But today, it stands as living proof. No system, no matter how big, survives long when it collides with the truth. I didn't reclaim those 50 acres just because I had the right. I reclaimed them to show the entire country that no one has the right to steal the land our ancestors left behind. And if you're being threatened, silenced, or squeezed by your HOA, remember this: the land may not have a voice, but justice does. And it's coming, one step at a time, one person at a time, just like I did.